And now can I call on Phil O'Reilly. Phil is the Chief Executive of Business New Zealand, and of course Business New Zealand is the largest business advocacy group in New Zealand. Phil.
Thanks, May. Thanks very much for the invitation. G'day. You well? Isn't it fantastic to be here in the Parliament? I've got the secret badges, you know, those secret badges. Everybody says you're not allowed to have the badge, you know, you're secret. So I'm here a little bit. It's fantastic to talk to you today. I'd just like to acknowledge May for putting the Public Law Toolbox together, and my apologies for being late with my contribution, May. What the Public Law Toolbox does is it talks about the importance of the government-business interface. And obviously, I would agree loudly with that thought that it's a big issue and a very important one, because that's how I get paid. But it's important anyway, despite the obvious self-interest. I'd start with this little thought. I remember in the mid-80s, when Roger Douglas was the Minister of Finance and Richard Prebble, those guys were running around, and they were saying success looks like business never goes to Wellington anymore. And that government just gets on with it. Well, I always thought that was a rubbish thought at the time, and I still think it's a rubbish thought now. The fact of the matter is that proper policy is based on the idea that those impacted by policy and those who will be in some way part of the outcome need to have their say and need to say something intelligent and insightful about that policy to make sure that it works for them. That's actually the way that New Zealand becomes successful. When I look at government policy that's been done in a pretty ill-informed way, often in a knee-jerk fashion late at night by some brilliant, insightful folk called politicians, it's often very, very poorly done. And really the big debate is not about whether it works, but the big debate is how to quietly unpick it and retrofit something that might actually work. So engaging with government, actually, is crucial not just for business, but it's also crucial for government and the citizenry, because what we seek from government, of course, is a set of policies and frameworks that might actually work and that might actually deliver economic growth and benefit not just to business, but also to communities, mums and dads and kids and all the rest. So every government, in essence, wants to make relevant law, wants to make good law. I've never heard a politician tell me they seek to make bad law. Never heard a bureaucrat tell me that either, and I believe every one of them every single time. So it's not a mistake in intention, it's a mistake in execution. And so that's why it's very, very important that whenever you pass a law, that governments hear you and that they make informed choices, even if you disagree with them. The other point I'd make here is that it's important that governments of whatever sort, including the bureaucracy, actually listen to Business Plus. I think it's quite important from my perspective that my arguments and my debating points and my brilliant insights informed by my 80,000 members are also, of course, contested. And I was looking up that famous Voltaire quote today, you know, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll die for your right to say it. Turns out that Voltaire didn't say that. Some punty you've never heard of said that and attributed it to Voltaire. There you go. Once you get famous, people say you say all sorts of interesting things when you don't. Anyway, but it's that sort of thought, the idea of this contest of ideas. Bernard Levin talks about this too, the famous English journalist. The free speech is for swine and liars as well as upright and honest men, he says. So the idea that I may disagree with you, I'm not suggesting you're a swine or a liar, is quite important, because by doing that, by actually having that debate, by having that clash, if you like, of ideas, or that trying to work out what we agree on and what we disagree on, that's actually really critical for politicians and bureaucrats as well. So I don't just think that I should be able to say what I say on behalf of business, or the business should have their say. I'll also argue strongly that those who don't agree with me should say what they say as well, because I'll hope that my arguments are better. And if they're not, I should walk away and go to the pub. Sometimes I do that. So the next point I'd make is that this point about working together. If you think about the challenges facing New Zealand, and the challenges facing most of the economies of the world, they're actually large, complex issues. If there was one of the little sayings I make about politics is that for every complex problem, there's a bright, shiny, simple solution that's wrong. And the political realm in New Zealand is full of them, you know, full of one-liners, full of 9-second sound bites on how to solve a particularly difficult problem. I'm just on a working group right now with the Children's Commissioner of all things on child poverty, you know. Why would a business person be on a working party on child poverty? Well, a couple of simple reasons. But the main one is those kids will turn up in our workplaces in 15 or 16 years' time, and they'll be not as good an employee as they could have been because of what we did to them when they were 0 to 3 years old. So there's a real reason for that. But you get the idea that part of this is about trying to make sure that you get as many heads around the table from as different a prospect as possible to try and solve some of those wicked problems that New Zealand faces. So these large, complex issues can only be solved by the private sector working together. Andrew Ferrier, the previous CEO of Fonterra, used to put it to me that government and business works best together when together we can move the needle. That was his reference to it, move the needle by working together. And the way I think about that is I seek to hold government to account for the things that government and only government can do. That's when I hold government to account. Passing tax laws, that sort of stuff, protecting the border, that sort of thing, policing. And then the government needs to hold the private sector to account for the things that only the private sector can do. Are we following those laws effectively? Are we investing appropriately? Are we treating our customers properly? Are we treating our communities properly? But there's a huge range of stuff in the middle. In fact, the majority of stuff in the middle is the stuff that actually we can't do unless we do it together. And I've put up a couple of classic examples of that. Christchurch, 48 hours after the big earthquake, the big aftershock in Christchurch, which lowered the CBD, we had a meeting of our major companies group, which is today just over 70 large companies in New Zealand, many of them in the room here. And we got the Prime Minister, the Minister of Economic Development at that stage, Jerry Brownlee, and Bill English on a line. They were going to come and meet with us anyway, as it turns out, on other issues. So we turned that into a post-earthquake meeting. We had about 50 CEOs sitting around that phone as well. And we agreed to set up some committees, 12 subcommittees in that case. Some of them immediate issues like getting water into the city and bread and so on. Some more long-term issues like infrastructure rebuild and so on. One or two of those committees are still operating today. That gives you a very concrete example of how you actually can, if you get companies and governments working together effectively, you can actually create great things at that interface between what government and business does. And of course, if you ever look at the current government's economic growth agenda, if you have successive governments have agendas or strategies. This government doesn't use the word strategy for some strange reason. It's an agenda. I don't understand the difference, go figure. So they've got an economic growth agenda. The last government had some strategies and some, I can't remember what they were called. It's so long ago. So in that case, this is where business and government are trying to work together to say if you can change the law in that sense, then that'll enable us to grow more strongly or more vigorously. And a point I was making in a speech just a few minutes ago is that it's that essence that we need to hold at the centre of the debate. What would it take for a normal, everyday business, small business, large business, international business, domestic business, whatever, what would it take for that business to invest a buck and hire a person more quickly today than they did yesterday because of something the government did or did not do? What would that look like? And that's a really useful way to ground the debate, because if we think private sector success, the success of businesses and their employees is the key factor that will actually mean that New Zealand can grow and be strong. That'll be the key way in which we can pay for mothers' hip operations and schools and hospitals and roads and all the rest. If we can take that as the basis of it, then we can ask some very simple questions about what it would take to gain business confidence. Often we put that in very complex language. It's about the government's fiscal position, whatever that means. It's actually quite simple when you think about the challenges that we've got and the way in which we need to think about them. So we are from a Business New Zealand perspective, we are working with government because we think that although we should hold the government to account for the things that they and only they can do, there's an enormous amount of work that we can do cooperatively, and a lot of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis is in that middle space, government and business working together, not about bitching and moaning and carrying on and saying you're wrong or you're right or whatever. It's about how can we achieve success together. I think I should use this audience to say that I think some of that relationship is under threat through a rather misconceived bill that's currently sitting in the Parliament, which would it's called the Lobbying Disclosure Bill. I think that's a poor piece of proposed legislation. It's trying to solve a problem that fundamentally doesn't exist in New Zealand. It fails to distinguish at the start between lobbying for gain, including by the green lobby groups, of course, not just business, but fails to distinguish between that and advocacy in the public interest. That's what I do. That's what many advocacy organisations do. It misunderstands, moreover, the fundamental nature of New Zealand society. And it goes something like this. I lobby politicians, I'm sad to say, it's a very sad sack, Nigel no mate's thought, but I actually lobby politicians in the Thorndon New World on a Sunday. Because I'm in my shorts and a t-shirt and we're at the bacon counter together. Notice my beautiful physique, you know. So I talk to them about stuff, you know, the bacon bill or whatever might be in the Parliament right now. Well, you can't do that with Barack Obama, ladies and gentlemen. You know, you need to have an appointment with him. And it's a very formal process. And I reckon my mum could lobby politicians if she wanted to. She can't, she's dead. But she could if she was alive. It'd be okay to do. I've just been at a lunch with these guys where half the table was having a chat to them. Now, were they lobbying them? Okay, I guess. So we should just take a step back about the realities of New Zealand and understand that our society is very, very different to many of the societies that have these kinds of legislative frameworks and solutions. And in fact, if you put this one in place, you would actually get in the way of part of the great magic of New Zealand, that anybody's allowed to wander up to John Key at a cocktail function or wherever on the street and say something that they think. And that to get in the way of that, I think, would be to actually ruin one of the key differences that makes New Zealand so strong and so successful. And I know that to be true because in other countries, organisations like mine can sell to their members access to politicians. I can't sell that. Everybody's got access to politicians in this country. What am I selling? No, what I'm talking about is actually that other bit that I was talking about in the previous slide about business and government working together more effectively to get those insights. So I'll argue that there are benefits from that advocacy. There's benefits to New Zealand as a whole in terms of with some of the things that we've worked on with governments, successive governments, by the way, this is not just this government, successive governments, tax, infrastructure, innovation, skills, and at the end of the day, what we're all about is trying to get ordinary citizens power to influence our democracy. That's what we should be all about. And yes, I talk with big businesses, but I also talk with people who own corner stores and dairies in Lumsden about what they might do about the current political situation. So everybody's allowed to say, and the wonderful thing about the Business New Zealand membership is that it encompasses everybody from that corner store in Lumsden right through to Fonterra with everybody in between. So that when we have those conversations, we can truly hold ourselves to account in the business community for what we say and how we say it to politicians. And then we can honestly hold them to account for how they act on behalf not of business interest, but on behalf of New Zealand's interest. Thanks for your time.